Rishi Sunak has just made his inaugural speech as the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And in that speech, he promised to fix the mistakes of his predecessor, Liz Truss. But the one thing he didn't promise to do was to try to fix the actual finances of the UK, because the UK finances were in a very, very bad position long before Liz Truss come along and put a load of fuel on that fire. So in this video, I want to talk about why Rishi cannot save the UK. We are heading in one direction. This ship is sinking, and it doesn't matter if we change the captain, we are still heading in the same direction. So the first thing that I want to show you is national debt. As things stand, we have just under 2.5 trillion in national debt. Now, I know a trillion is very hard to visualize how much that actually is. So earlier, I took 2.5 trillion and I divided it by the population of the UK. Now, depending on whether you trust the official figures, the official population of the UK is 67 million. It's probably much higher than that, but I did 2.5 trillion divided by 67 million, and it worked out approximately £38,000 per person. So that gives you an idea of the scale of the UK national debt. Now, over the past 10 years or so, the scale of that debt hasn't been as big an issue as it probably should have been. But with interest rates going up, it's going to become a much bigger problem. And if we go to the OBR report here, and I'm going to scroll down, this, bear in mind, is from March this year, and that's going to be important, and I'll show you why in a moment. In 2022/23, we expect debt interest spending to total 83 billion. So the UK is expected to spend 83 billion next year servicing existing debt. That is a huge amount of money just to be spending on debt interest. That would represent 5.2% of total public spending and is the equivalent of £1,900 per household. And if you remember, I said this data was from March, which wasn't taken into account. It's now much more expensive for the government to create new debt. So if we go back to March this year, you can see the yield on 10-year gilts or 10-year bonds are the same thing, which is the yield, the interest rate the government pays to create debt was around 1.5%. And this graph here is for the past 5 years. You can see the most they've paid in the last 5 years was about 1.5%. And over the last year or two, it's been below 1% at times. But in the past month, we've seen it as high as 4%. So it's now 2 to 3 times more expensive for the government to create new debt. So this OBR forecast that the government's going to spend £83 billion next year servicing existing debt is probably going to be off. And I wouldn't be surprised to see it be in excess of 100 billion for the government to service existing debt next year. So that's one of the first big problems that Rishi faces, and I really don't see him fixing it. Now, I know the government have promised they're going to make an announcement in a week or so showing us their financial plans and how they're going to balance the books. But I have seen the UK government promise this before. Since the global financial crisis, they were promising to use austerity to balance the books. But you can see all the way back, the last time that the national debt did not grow was in 2001, but it's been growing every year since. Even with all the stuff with austerity and the global financial crisis, they were unable to ever balance the books. So I don't have very much confidence that whatever the government announces next week will allow them to balance the books. So that's the first big problem. The second one, which is something that we're all feeling at the moment, that is energy prices going up. Now, the government has obviously announced plans to put a price cap in place for this winter, and it was supposed to be for the next 2 years, but the government have gone back on that because it's going to cost them too much. And from April next year, they're going to assess who they're actually going to support. So they're going to continue to try and support the most vulnerable in society, but the support is probably going to be withdrawn for a lot of people. And energy prices are going to go up even further in April. They're expecting it to be in excess of £4,000. So the government is going to be struggling with their own debt, and the population are struggling with their debt as well. So it's going to be really, really difficult for the UK. And the energy bills are just part of the overall inflation narrative. You can see here, inflation is at 10%. But I think, honestly, if you ask most people on the street what inflation was actually at the moment, I don't think any of us will be saying it's 10%. It feels like it's a lot higher than that to me. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. So inflation is going to be very, very difficult for the new Prime Minister to have any impact on, as most of our inflation at the moment is imported because supply costs have gone up so much. The Bank of England are going to hike interest rates at the next meeting, but it's probably unlikely to have a big impact as we're part of a global economy. So until the world basically has a big reset, inflation isn't going to come down enough. Now in the UK, we are a bit more vulnerable than other countries due to the way a number of things are set up, but that's something I might dive into in another video. But certainly inflation isn't going anywhere quickly, and with wages not keeping up with inflation, we are all getting poorer every single month. And obviously to add to that, with inflation going up and then the Bank of England hiking interest rates in response to that, mortgage costs are going up, which we covered in previous videos. I'm going to come back to that at the very end of the video. So mortgage costs, you can see here the average 5-year fixed is now at 5.4%. Whereas at the start of the year, it was below 2%. And when you combine all of these things together, there's very little the government can actually do because they cannot afford to support these things. They can't keep creating new debt, as that will probably lead to even more inflation. So we're getting to the point where everyone is feeling the pain, both the public and the government, and there's very little that anyone can do about it. And to make matters worse, most of us have very little savings to deal with the problems that we face. So these bars here show what is going on. They've broken it down by age group, so from 25 to 34, 35 to 44, etc. And then the colors here show how much savings people have by age. So if we look at the amount of people that don't have any savings, which is yellow, green, and grey, because the pink bars are 0 to £500 in savings. Actually, let's do all of these. So these are people that have less than £500 in savings. So for people between 25 and 34, 12 plus 23, 35, 38, 44% of people between 25 and 34 have less than £500 in savings. For people that are between 35 and 44, we've got 17 plus 9, that's 26, 28, 33. 33% of people between 35 and 44 have less than £500 in savings. And the reason that is so important is the majority of people that are paying mortgages are in these lower age groups. So if less than half, or if close to half of them have very little savings or no savings at all, how are they going to deal with things like mortgages going up, with energy bills going up, with inflation being at crazy high levels, and knowing that there's going to be very little help and support coming from the government? So that is why, despite the fact we've got a new Prime Minister that hopefully cannot possibly be worse than Liz Truss, that we should be optimistic. I'm not optimistic. I do not think the UK can be fixed at this stage. Now, if you want to see more from me, make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you found this video helpful, make sure you scroll down and hit that like button. If you want to see my most recent thoughts, follow me at Darren the DGen on Twitter. And if you want to know how big I think the upcoming housing crash is going to be, I'm going to pop up a video in front of me now, and I recommend you guys give that a watch.